welcome to another Hayley-Roxanna crafts video. In this video I'm going to be talking about the back of your cross stitching and why it's helpful to keep it as neat as possible. This is some cross stitching I've done. That's the front and that's the back of mine. Some stitchers will tell you that the back of your work really doesn't matter. Up to a point they are right. But I'm going to give you 6 reasons why it's helpful to keep the back of your cross stitching as neat as possible. The first reason for keeping the back of your cross stitching neat would be if the back can be seen on the finished piece. This is probably an obvious reason for keeping the back of your work neat, because obviously if you can see the back, it would be much better if the back is probably almost as neat as the front, just from an aesthetic point of view. The second reason for keeping the back of your work neat is that if the back is untidy, it may cause lumps and bumps to appear on the front of the piece when framing it. This does depend on how you are framing the finished piece, but if you are putting something a hard surface behind the finished cross stitch rather than a padded surface, then if you've got lots of threads that aren't sitting flat against the back of your work, that can cause lumps and bumps to then appear on the front of it and make it much harder for you to get a nice smooth finish when your finished cross stitch is framed. So the third reason is that it can be hard to find the holes and push the needle through your fabric if the thread on the back becomes too thick. This is something that might happen if you've got a lot of threads travelling across the back, sort of crisscrossing on the back of your work, because obviously these could then cover up holes and just make it harder to find where you need to put your needle through to come through to the front. This is more likely to happen if you've got a piece with lots of confetti stitches in it, so where you've got like a lot of different coloured threads in quite a small area. You just need to decide whether it's worth finishing off the thread and starting again in the other place for the stitches, or whether it's worth carrying them across. Generally, I won't carry a thread over more than 3 or 4 squares. And that's not to say I will never do that, but just as a general rule. So for example, on this piece, where we've got the dark purple this side and this side, up here, I would probably go across the squares on the back. But as we come down, where there's sort of 6-7 stitches to cross from each side, then I probably wouldn't carry the thread over. I'd just finish off on the one side and start again on the other. So the fourth reason you may want to keep your work neat on the back is to avoid trails of thread showing through to the front of a finished piece. This is particularly important to consider if you are using thread that is a lot darker than the material you're stitching on, or if there's going to be a lot of light behind your finished piece of work when you display it. So for example, if you were making it into a lampshade, or you were going to be displaying your work on the windowsill. In these situations, you may want to avoid crossing over any squares that aren't going to have other stitches in front of them on the front of the work, just to avoid any thread showing through to the front of your finished piece and making the front look untidy. So the fifth reason for keeping the back of your work neat is that a neat back reduces the amount of thread wasted, which can actually lead to you saving money. So carrying your thread across lots of squares might not be an efficient use of your thread. If it uses more thread to carry from one area to the next one, it might actually be better to finish off the thread and then start again in the next area. Just so that you don't use more thread than is necessary on your project, which in the long run might actually save you money, as you won't need to buy quite as many threads. And the sixth reason is that a neat back is easier to undo if you make a mistake. So for me, this is the most important reason for keeping the back of my work neat. If I make a mistake, I want it to be easy to be able to undo my work to correct that mistake. And if the threads are neat on the back, it's much easier to see where you need to pull on a thread to undo the crosses to correct your mistake. And also this can mean that you don't damage your threads as much when you're undoing, so that these threads can be used again when you're correcting your work, again leading to less wastage of thread. So in conclusion, for me, keeping the back of my cross stitching as neat as possible is important for improving the overall look of a finished piece. Note I say the back needs to be kept as neat as possible. This doesn't mean it needs to be perfect, right? And you certainly shouldn't be worrying about making the back of your work perfect, that it takes away from the enjoyment of actually stitching. A lot of things can influence how neat you can make the back be. The design itself, your experience as a stitcher, can all make a difference as to how neat you can make the back of your work. And for most finished pieces, nobody does see the back once it's finished off. So you just need to make sure that the back of your work doesn't negatively impact the front of your work, as obviously that's the most important part. That's the bit that does need to look neat, because that's the bit people are going to see. So you just don't want anything from the back affecting the front. In my next video, I will share some little tips on things that you can do to help keep the back as neat as possible. If you've got any questions, pop them in the comments and I'll do my best to answer them. And that's everything for this time. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.